The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Marianne Ellsworth collapsed against the weathered hitching post outside the Taylor, Texas general store, her legs finally giving out after 3 days of fever and dysentery that had plagued her since leaving San Antonio in the summer heat of 1878. She gripped the splintered wood with trembling fingers, watching as the other passengers retrieved their belongings and dispersed into the bustling frontier town, none of them sparing a glance for the young woman who could barely stand upright. The sun beat down mercilessly on her bonnet, and even through the haze of illness, Marianne knew she needed to find lodging soon before she collapsed entirely in the middle of the dirt road where horses and cattle kicked up clouds of choking dust. She had come to Texas to start over after her father's death. 6 months prior had left her with nothing but debts and the bitter realization that the Philadelphia boarding house they had run together would never truly be hers. Her mother had died when Marianne was only 12, and her father had raised her alone, teaching her to read and write and keep accounts, skills that had seemed so valuable back east, but felt utterly useless now as she struggled to remain conscious in the oppressive Texas heat. At 22 years old, she had imagined herself capable of anything, but the reality of frontier life was proving far harsher than the romantic notions she had harbored while reading advertisements for governesses and school teachers in western towns. The advertisement that had brought her to Taylor had been specific: a wealthy rancher seeking a tutor for his 2 young daughters, offering room and board plus a modest salary. Marianne had written immediately, and the response had come within 3 weeks, a formal letter from Maxwell Lansford himself, stating that if she could reach Taylor by mid-July, the position would be hers. She had sold everything she owned to afford the journey, and now here she stood, or rather slumped, with her traveling trunk somewhere behind her, and no strength left to even call out for assistance. "Miss, are you quite all right?" The voice was deep and concerned, flavored with the distinctive drawl of a man who had spent his entire life under these endless skies. Marianne tried to lift her head, but found the effort beyond her. Her vision swam, and she felt herself beginning to slide down the post toward the dusty ground. Strong hands caught her before she could fall, and suddenly she was being lifted as gently as one might lift a child, cradled against a chest that smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat. She should have protested, should have insisted she could manage on her own, but the truth was she could not manage anything at all in this moment. "I have you," the voice said quietly, and there was something in those 3 simple words that made Marianne feel safer than she had felt since leaving Philadelphia. "Just rest easy now. I will get you somewhere cool." Through her half-closed eyes, Marianne could make out a strong jaw, shadowed with several days of stubble, dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green, like creek water reflecting storm clouds. He carried her as though she weighed nothing at all, his boots making solid sounds against the wooden planks as he stepped up onto the boardwalk. "Doc Harrison," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the ambient noise of the street. "Need you at the hotel right quick." Marianne wanted to explain that she could not afford a hotel, that she needed to find the Lansford Ranch, that her trunk contained everything she owned in the world, but the words tangled themselves on her tongue and came out as nothing more than a weak murmur. The man carrying her looked down at her with those remarkable eyes, and she saw genuine worry etched across his sun-bronzed features. "Do not try to talk," he said gently. "Save your strength. Whatever trouble brought you to this state, we will sort it out once you are well again." The interior of the hotel was blessedly cool and dim after the glaring sunlight outside. Marianne was vaguely aware of being carried up a flight of stairs, of a door opening, of being laid down on something soft. A woman's voice joined the man's, then another man's voice, older and more authoritative. Hands touched her forehead, her wrist. Someone was removing her boots. She tried again to protest, but managed only a small sound of distress. "Hush now," the woman's voice said, kind but firm. "You are burning up with fever, dear. We need to get these heavy traveling clothes off you and get some water into you. Henry, you step outside now while I tend to her." I will be right outside the door, the man who had carried her said. And Marianne found herself wanting to ask him not to go, which was absurd, given that she did not even know his name. The next several hours passed in a blur of cool cloths, bitter medicine, and sips of water that her stomach threatened to reject. The woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson, the hotel owner's wife, was patient and gentle, changing Marianne's sweat-soaked nightgown twice and spooning broth into her mouth even when she insisted she could not swallow another drop. The doctor came and went, his diagnosis exactly what Marianne had suspected: dysentery brought on by bad water somewhere along her journey, complicated by heat exhaustion and sheer physical exhaustion. She needs rest and fluids, Doc Harrison said, his voice carrying through the thin walls. Another day traveling in her condition, and we would be digging a grave instead of nursing her back to health. Lucky that Henry found her when he did. Henry Lansford always did have a knack for being in the right place at the right time, Mrs. Patterson replied, and Marianne's fever-addled mind tried to make sense of that name. Lansford, Maxwell Lansford, the rancher who had hired her. When she finally woke with something approaching clarity, late afternoon sunlight was slanting through the hotel room window, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Her fever had broken, leaving her weak but clear-headed for the first time in days. She turned her head carefully and saw a man sitting in a chair near the window, his hat resting on his knee, his attention focused on something outside. It was the man who had caught her, who had carried her here. "Thank you," Marianne said, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. He turned immediately, rising from his chair with an easy grace that spoke of a life spent in constant motion. In the better light, she could see him more clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of a man who worked with his hands every day. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all strong bones and weathered skin, but it was his eyes that captured her attention again, so full of intelligence and something else she could not quite name. "No thanks needed," he said, pulling the chair closer to the bed and settling back into it. "How are you feeling?" "Like I have been trampled by a herd of cattle," Marianne admitted, trying to summon a smile. "But better than I was. I am Marianne Ellsworth. I arrived on today's stage from San Antonio." "Henry Lansford," he replied, confirming what she had already begun to suspect. "And I know who you are. I have been expecting you, though not quite in this condition. My father hired you to tutor my sisters." Marianne felt her face flush with embarrassment. This was not at all the impression she had hoped to make on her new employer's family. "I apologize for the trouble. I was well when I left Philadelphia, but the journey was more difficult than I anticipated. I will be ready to begin work as soon as I am able to stand without assistance." "There is no rush," Henry said firmly. "My sisters have gone their whole lives without a proper tutor. Another week or two will not hurt them. Right now you need to focus on recovering your strength." "I cannot afford to stay in a hotel for a week," Marianne protested, already calculating how little money she had left and how far it would not stretch. "Perhaps if someone could help me to the ranch, I could rest there just as easily." "The ranch is a half-day's ride from town," Henry said, his tone making it clear that he considered this option out of the question. "And the room is already paid for, so you may as well stop worrying about that. Mrs. Patterson will look after you, and Doc Harrison will check on you daily. When you are strong enough to travel, I will take you out to meet my father and sisters." Marianne wanted to argue, but the truth was she could barely lift her head from the pillow without feeling dizzy. Pride was one thing, but practicality had to win out eventually. "That is very generous. I promise I will repay you once I have received my first wages. Consider it an advance on your salary," Henry said with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer and more approachable. "Though truth be told, my father should have sent money for your travel expenses. He can be forgetful about such details. He is a brilliant rancher, but not always the most practical man when it comes to matters outside of cattle and horses." Despite her weakened state, Marianne found herself curious about this man who sat so patiently beside her sickbed. Do you work on the ranch with your father? I do. Have done since I was old enough to sit a horse, which was about 5 years old by my reckoning. It is a good life, if a hard one. We run about 3,000 head of cattle across 15,000 acres. It keeps us plenty busy, especially during roundup and branding season. And your sisters? How old are they? Emma is 12 and Lily just turned 10. They are good girls, smart as whips, but they have been running a bit wild since our mother passed 3 years ago. My father does his best, but raising daughters was never his strong suit. That is why he finally agreed to hire a tutor. I have been pushing him to do it for over a year now. There was something in the way Henry spoke about his sisters that softened his entire demeanor. Marianne found herself warming to him despite her natural reserve with strangers. I am sorry about your mother. Thank you. It was a fever. Came on sudden and took her within a week. Doc Harrison did everything he could, but sometimes there is no fighting what the good Lord has in mind. He stood abruptly, as though uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. I should let you rest. Mrs. Patterson will bring you supper in a bit. Is there anything you need? My trunk, Marianne said, suddenly remembering. It was with the stage luggage. Already retrieved and stored safely downstairs. I will have Mrs. Patterson bring up anything you need from it. He settled his hat back on his head, the gesture somehow both casual and formal. I will check on you tomorrow, Miss Ellsworth. In the meantime, you follow Doc Harrison's orders and get yourself well. My sisters are eager to meet you, but they can wait until you are back on your feet properly. After he left, Marianne lay back against the pillows and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. She had come to Texas expecting to work for a rancher named Maxwell Lansford, but it was Maxwell's son Henry who had rescued her from her collapse, who had carried her with such unexpected gentleness, who had paid for her room and sat watching over her while she recovered. She knew she should feel nothing but gratitude, but there was something else stirring beneath that gratitude, something that had to do with those gray-green eyes and the careful way he had held her, as though she were something precious and fragile. She pushed the thought away firmly. She was here to work, to earn her keep, to build a new life for herself through honest labor and determination. The last thing she needed was to develop foolish romantic notions about her employer's son, especially when she had not even officially begun her position yet. Besides, a man like Henry Lansford, who clearly commanded respect in this town and had a prosperous ranch to help run, would have no interest in an Eastern woman who had arrived half dead from fever and could not even manage to stay upright long enough to introduce herself properly. Still, when sleep claimed her again, she dreamed of being lifted gentle as a whisper, of strong arms and a voice that promised safety in a strange and unforgiving land. The next 3 days passed in a slow progression of gradual improvement. Marianne graduated from broth to solid food, from lying flat to sitting propped against pillows, from needing assistance to walk to the washroom to managing the short distance on her own with only slight dizziness. Mrs. Patterson proved to be a wealth of information about Taylor and its inhabitants, gossiping cheerfully while she changed sheets and brought meals. The Lansfords are one of the founding families of this area, she explained, while helping Marianne into a fresh nightgown on the second day. Maxwell Lansford came out here in the 50s, before Texas was even properly settled in these parts. Built that ranch up from nothing with his own 2 hands and the help of his wife, God rest her soul. Catherine was a lady born and bred, came from Virginia originally, but she took to frontier life like she was born to it. A real shame when the fever took her. She and Maxwell were devoted to each other, truly devoted. And Henry? Marianne asked, trying to keep her tone casual. He seems very capable. Oh, Henry is the pride of the family, no question about it. Maxwell always said his son was born knowing things about horses and cattle that it took other men a lifetime to learn. But it is not just the ranching. Henry is educated too. Went to school back east for 3 years, studying animal husbandry and business. Came back with all sorts of modern ideas about breeding and land management. Some of the old-timers thought he was too big for his britches, but he has proven them wrong time and again. Mrs. Patterson leaned in conspiratorially. Between you and me, dear, half the unmarried women in Taylor and the surrounding ranches have set their caps at Henry Lansford. He is 26 years old, handsome, prosperous, and kind to boot, but he never seems to pay them any mind. Oh, he is polite enough at church socials and town dances, but he never courts any of them seriously. His father despairs of ever getting grandchildren, or so I hear. Marianne felt an unexpected twist of something that might have been disappointment. Of course, a man like Henry Lansford would have women pursuing him. She had been foolish to think his kindness toward her was anything more than simple Christian charity toward a stranger in need. True to his word, Henry came to check on her each day. The visits were brief and proper, always with Mrs. Patterson or Doc Harrison present, but Marianne found herself listening for his footsteps on the stairs, found herself taking extra care with her appearance even though she was still confined to bed rest. They talked about safe, impersonal topics: the ranch, the weather, the growing season, the challenges of raising cattle in Texas heat. But sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something thoughtful and intent that made her heart beat faster. On the fourth day, Doc Harrison pronounced her well enough to venture downstairs for supper, though he cautioned against any strenuous activity for at least another week. Marianne dressed carefully in one of her simpler gowns, a dove-gray cotton that had seen better days, but was clean and respectable. She pinned her dark hair up carefully, studying herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The fever had left her thinner than before, her cheekbones more pronounced, her green eyes seeming larger in her pale face. She looked fragile, she thought with some frustration, when she wanted to look capable and strong. Mrs. Patterson helped her navigate the stairs, and they settled her at a small table in the hotel dining room. It was early evening, and the room was beginning to fill with boarders and townspeople seeking their supper. Marianne was studying the simple menu when a shadow fell across her table. "Miss Ellsworth," Henry said, removing his hat, "it is good to see you up and about. May I join you?" "Of course," Marianne said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Her pulse quickened as he settled into it, his long legs stretched out beneath the table. "I thought perhaps we could discuss the arrangements for your position," Henry said after they had both ordered their meals. "So you know what to expect when you come out to the ranch." "That would be helpful," Marianne agreed, grateful to have something concrete to focus on, besides the way the lamplight caught in his dark hair. "My sisters are, as I mentioned, 12 and 10. They can read and write at a basic level, thanks to our mother's teaching before she passed, but their education has been somewhat neglected since then. My father would like you to instruct them in all the usual subjects: literature, mathematics, history, geography, and so forth. Additionally, Emma is at an age where she should be learning more refined skills, music and such, though I will be honest and tell you we have no piano, and neither my father nor I can carry a tune." Marianne smiled at that. "I can play piano moderately well and sing adequately. Perhaps in time your father might consider purchasing an instrument, but there is plenty to work on in the meantime. The house is large, and we have a separate room that was set up as a schoolroom years ago. You will have your own bedroom as well, quite comfortable. Meals will be taken with the family. We keep a few household staff: a housekeeper named Mrs. Chen, who is an excellent cook, and 2 men who help with maintenance and such around the house and immediate grounds. The ranch hands have their own bunkhouse and mess about a quarter-mile from the main house." Their food arrived, and for a few minutes they ate in comfortable silence. Marianne was surprised to find herself genuinely hungry for the first time since her illness began. The simple beef stew and fresh bread tasted better than any meal she could remember. "May I ask you something?" Henry said after a while, his tone careful. "Certainly. What made you decide to come to Texas? It is a long way from Philadelphia for a woman alone." Marianne considered how much to reveal. She had learned long ago that people judged women who found themselves in reduced circumstances, assuming some failure of character or morals. But something about Henry's straightforward manner invited honesty. My father died 6 months ago, she said quietly. He had debts I did not know about. The boarding house we ran together had to be sold to settle them. I found myself at 22 with no family, no home, and no prospects. I could have sought work as a maid or seamstress, but I had an education and I wanted to use it. When I saw your father's advertisement seeking a tutor, it seemed like Providence offering me a new beginning. That took courage, Henry said, his gray-green eyes serious. Coming all this way to a place you had never seen, knowing no one. Or desperation, Marianne replied, with a self-deprecating smile. I am not certain courage and desperation are easily distinguished from one another. I think they are more closely related than most people admit, Henry said thoughtfully. It takes a certain kind of bravery to keep moving forward when you have nothing to fall back on. My father was like that when he came to Texas. His family back in Kentucky had disowned him for marrying beneath his station as they saw it. He and my mother came west with almost nothing and built everything they have through sheer determination and hard work. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Henry's expression softened with memory. She used to say that the West was a place where people could remake themselves, where what you did mattered more than where you came from. I think you will find that to be true, Miss Ellsworth. Out here, nobody much cares about your family name or your past circumstances. They care about whether you do your work and keep your word. I intend to do both, Marianne said firmly. I do not doubt it. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. I want you to know that you will be safe at the ranch. My father is a good man, and I give you my word that you will be treated with respect. If you ever have any concerns or troubles, you can come to me. There was something in his voice that made Marianne look at him more closely. Has there been trouble with previous tutors or governesses? No, nothing like that. We have never had anyone in that position before. But I know that sometimes young women in positions of employment can find themselves in difficult situations, subject to unwanted attentions, or worse. I want you to know that will not happen in our household. Marianne felt a wave of gratitude mixed with something warmer. Thank you, Mr. Lansford. That means more than you know. Henry, he said suddenly, out here, we do not stand much on formality once we know someone. I would be pleased if you would call me Henry. Then you must call me Marianne, she replied, feeling as though they were crossing some invisible threshold into something new. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from books they had both read to the differences between Eastern and Western life, to the peculiar challenges of ranching in Texas. Marianne found herself laughing more than she had in months, charmed by Henry's dry humor and the way he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. When they finally parted ways, with Henry promising to return in 2 days to take her to the ranch if Doc Harrison approved, Marianne climbed the stairs to her room feeling lighter than she had since her father's death. Over the next 2 days, Marianne worked to rebuild her strength, taking short walks around the hotel and eating as much as she could manage. She spent time reviewing her teaching materials and planning lessons for Emma and Lily, wanting to be as prepared as possible. She also took the opportunity to explore Taylor a bit, walking up and down the main street with Mrs. Patterson as her guide. Taylor was a rough but growing town, with a main street that boasted a general store, a bank, a blacksmith, a livery stable, the hotel, a church, and several other businesses. The buildings were mostly wooden, built for function rather than beauty, but there was an energy to the place that Marianne found appealing. People nodded greetings to her on the street, and more than one person stopped to ask how she was feeling. Word of her arrival and illness having spread through the small community. That is both the blessing and curse of a town like this, Mrs. Patterson said cheerfully. Everyone knows everyone else's business, but they also look after each other. You will never want for help if you need it, but you will also find it difficult to keep any secrets. On the appointed day, Henry arrived at the hotel driving a wagon rather than riding horseback. Marianne appreciated his thoughtfulness, knowing she was not yet strong enough for a long ride. Her trunk was loaded into the wagon bed, and Henry helped her up onto the seat beside him with careful hands. "Ready?" he asked, gathering the reins. "Ready," Marianne confirmed, her heart beating with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The journey to the Lansford Ranch took them through countryside that was both beautiful and harsh. Rolling hills covered in tall grass stretched in every direction, dotted with clusters of live oak trees and occasional stands of mesquite. The sky seemed impossibly vast, a dome of brilliant blue unmarred by a single cloud. They passed several herds of cattle, and Henry pointed out landmarks and explained various aspects of the ranch's operations. "That creek there," he said, gesturing to a line of trees that marked running water, "is one of the reasons my father chose this land. Reliable water is everything out here. We have 3 creeks that run through the property, plus several stock ponds. During the dry season, when some of the creeks run low, those ponds keep the herds healthy." "It must be incredibly difficult work," Marianne observed, watching a group of cowboys working in the distance, moving cattle from one pasture to another. "It is, but it is also rewarding in a way that is hard to explain to someone who has never done it. There is something deeply satisfying about working with animals and land, about seeing your efforts translate directly into results. When a new calf is born healthy, when a herd makes it through a hard winter, when a good rain comes at just the right time, it feels like a small victory against very long odds." Marianne heard the passion in his voice and understood a little better why he had returned to Texas after his Eastern education. "You love it." "I do," Henry admitted. "I thought about staying in Boston after I finished school. I had job offers from several agricultural companies. But this land gets into your blood. I missed the big sky and the work and even the dust and heat. Missed my family too, of course. My father needed me, and after my mother died, I knew I could never leave my sisters to grow up without someone to look after them. They are lucky to have a brother who cares so much. I hope they see it that way. At the moment, they mostly seem to think I am an interfering nuisance who will not let them do as they please." But he said it with affection, and Marianne found herself looking forward to meeting these girls who had clearly captured their brother's heart. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill, and Marianne caught her breath. It was larger than she had expected, a sprawling 2-story structure built of stone and timber with a wide porch wrapping around at least 2 sides. Several outbuildings were visible nearby, a large barn, a bunkhouse, various sheds and pens. The whole compound was set in a grove of ancient live oaks that provided precious shade, and she could see the glint of water from a nearby creek. "It is beautiful," she said sincerely. "My father and mother built the original house, just 4 rooms the year they were married. They added on as the ranch prospered and as children came along. I have 2 older brothers who moved on to start their own ranches further west, which is why I am still here helping my father. Somebody had to stay and run things. Do you resent that?" Henry seemed to consider the question seriously as he guided the wagon down the slope toward the house. "No, I might have if I had wanted something different from life. But I always knew I would run this ranch someday. It is what I was raised to do, and it is what I am good at. My brothers are better suited to their own paths, and I am better suited to mine." As they approached the house, 2 figures came flying out the front door and down the porch steps. Even from a distance, Marianne could tell they were children, and their excited voices carried clearly in the afternoon air. "She is here! Henry brought her!" "Is that really her?" "She looks so small." Henry pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and set the brake, then jumped down and came around to help Marianne descend. His hands were warm and steady at her waist as he lifted her down, and he held on a moment longer than strictly necessary, as though making sure she was steady on her feet. "Girls, give her a moment to catch her breath before you start chattering," he said, but his tone was indulgent. Marianne found herself face to face with 2 girls who were clearly sisters despite the difference in their ages. Both had the same dark hair and gray-green eyes as their brother, though Emma's features were beginning to show the promise of the woman she would become while Lily still had a child's roundness to her face. Miss Ellsworth, Emma said with a creditable attempt at formality, dropping a small curtsy. We are so pleased you have come. Father told us you were quite ill, and we have been very worried. Thank you, Emma. I am much recovered now, and very pleased to meet you both. Marianne smiled at the younger girl, who was practically bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. You must be Lily. Yes, madam. Can you really play piano? And do you know any good stories? Henry says you are from Philadelphia, and that is where the Liberty Bell is. And I would very much like to hear about that and also about cities, because I have never been to a proper city. Only Taylor, and that hardly counts according to Henry, though I think it is very exciting. Lily, Henry said with evident patience born of long practice, take a breath. I can answer all those questions and more, Marianne assured the girl, charmed by her enthusiasm. We will have plenty of time to talk about all sorts of things. The front door opened again, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall like Henry, but broader, his dark hair liberally streaked with gray, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. Maxwell Lansford had the bearing of a man accustomed to command, but his expression as he looked at his daughters was soft with affection. Miss Ellsworth, he said, coming down the steps with his hand extended. Welcome to our home. I apologize for not meeting you in town myself, but Henry assured me he had everything well in hand. I hope you have recovered from your illness. I have. Thank you, Mr. Lansford. And thank you for your patience with my delayed arrival. Nonsense. These things cannot be helped. Come inside out of this heat. Mrs. Chen has prepared a cold luncheon, and I am sure you would like to see your room and get settled. The interior of the house was cooler and more refined than the exterior had suggested. The furniture was solid and well made, with touches that spoke of a woman's influence. Cushions on the chairs, curtains at the windows, a vase of wildflowers on a table. Mrs. Chen, a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, greeted Marianne with a nod and immediately began issuing orders about bringing up the trunk and preparing cool water for washing. Marianne's room was on the second floor, spacious and airy with windows that looked out over the creek. The bed was covered with a cheerful quilt, and there was a washstand, a wardrobe, a comfortable chair, and a small desk. It was simple but clean and pleasant, far nicer than she had dared hope. The schoolroom is just down the hall, Emma said, hovering in the doorway. Would you like to see it? Perhaps after Miss Ellsworth has had a chance to rest and refresh herself, Henry suggested, appearing behind his sisters. She has had a long morning. But Marianne, seeing the barely contained eagerness in both girls' faces, shook her head. I would love to see it now, if that is all right. I am not so fragile as all that. The schoolroom proved to be a large, light-filled space with a blackboard on one wall, shelves filled with books, and a large table surrounded by chairs. Someone had made an effort to prepare it for use. The surfaces were dust-free. Fresh chalk sat in the tray beneath the blackboard, and paper and pens were neatly arranged on the table. Mother used to teach us in here, Emma said quietly, before she got sick. We have not used it much since then. Then I am honored to continue her work, Marianne said gently. I am sure she would be pleased to know you are continuing your education. Over the next few weeks, Marianne settled into a routine that was unlike anything she had known in her old life. She woke early, took breakfast with the family, and then spent the morning hours working with Emma and Lily in the schoolroom. The girls proved to be bright and eager students once they got past their initial tendency to test boundaries. Afternoons were often spent on more practical lessons, teaching the girls to sew more complicated stitches, working on their drawing and painting, taking nature walks to collect specimens and discuss botany and geography. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. Marianne found herself growing genuinely fond of both girls. Emma was thoughtful and artistic, with a gift for drawing that Marianne encouraged at every opportunity. Lily was more restless and energetic, but she had a quick mind and a natural facility with mathematics that surprised everyone. Both girls had been starved for female company and attention, and they soaked up Marianne's instruction like dry ground receiving rain. Maxwell Lansford proved to be a kind, if somewhat distant, employer. He took genuine interest in his daughter's progress, reviewing their work in the evenings and praising their improvements. But he spent most of his time out on the range with his men, and Marianne often went days, seeing him only at meals. It was Henry whose presence became the constant in her days. He was in and out of the house regularly, stopping in to check on ranch business with his father or to visit with his sisters. He often joined them for the midday meal, and several times a week he would appear in the late afternoon to take Emma and Lily riding, insisting that they needed exercise and fresh air after their studies. "You should come with us," Lily said one day, about 3 weeks after Marianne's arrival. "Henry says you need to learn to ride properly if you are going to live in Texas." Marianne had been dreading this. She had ridden a few times in her life, sedate rides in city parks on well-trained horses, but nothing that would prepare her for the kind of riding these frontier people did. "I am not sure I would be able to keep up with you." "Nonsense," Henry said, appearing in the doorway of the schoolroom with his hat in his hands. "I have a very gentle mare named Daisy, who would be perfect for you. She is steady and calm, and I give you my word she will not run away with you. Please, Miss Ellsworth," Emma added her voice to the plea. "It would be such fun to have you come along." And so Marianne found herself being led to the barn, where Henry introduced her to Daisy, a pretty chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead and kind dark eyes. The horse nuzzled Marianne's outstretched hand, and some of her nervousness eased. "She likes you already," Henry said with satisfaction. "Now, have you ridden before at all?" "A few times, but nothing serious. We will start with the basics then." He proceeded to show her how to properly groom and saddle a horse, explaining each step with patience. His hands were deft and sure as he worked, and Marianne found herself watching him as much as watching what he was doing. There was something deeply attractive about his competence, the easy confidence with which he moved through tasks that were second nature to him. When it came time to mount, Marianne positioned herself beside the horse as Henry had instructed and tried to pull herself up into the saddle. But her arms, still not fully recovered from her illness, trembled with the effort, and she could not quite manage it. She tried again with the same result, frustration rising in her chest. "Here," Henry said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Let me help." Before she could protest, his hands were at her waist, and he was lifting her as effortlessly as he had that first day in town, gentle as a whisper. He placed her carefully in the saddle, his hands steadying her until she found her seat and gathered the reins. Their faces were very close for a moment, and Marianne saw something flicker in his eyes, something warm and intent that made her breath catch. "All right?" he asked, his voice slightly rough. "Yes," she managed. "Thank you." He held her gaze a moment longer, then stepped back and went to fetch his own horse. Emma and Lily were already mounted and waiting impatiently, and soon the four of them were riding out at an easy walk. That evening became a regular occurrence. 3 or 4 times a week, Henry would take them all riding, sometimes just around the immediate ranch lands, sometimes further out to show Marianne some feature of the landscape. A particularly beautiful view, a canyon carved by centuries of water, a meadow filled with wildflowers. He was always patient with her inexperience, always ready with a steadying hand or word of encouragement. And every time, when her strength failed her and she could not mount her horse on her own, Henry would lift her into the saddle with that same careful gentleness, as though she were something precious. His hands would linger just a moment at her waist, and their eyes would meet, and something unspoken but powerful would arc between them. Marianne knew she was falling in love with him. She tried to fight it, tried to remind herself of all the reasons it was foolish and impractical. She was his employee, dependent on his family for her livelihood. He could have any woman in Taylor if he chose. She had nothing to offer him but herself, and that did not seem like nearly enough for a man like Henry Lansford. But her heart paid no attention to her practical objections. She loved the way he was with his sisters, patient and playful and protective all at once. She loved his laugh, rare but genuine when it came. She loved the way he talked about the land and the animals with such passion and knowledge. She loved the way he listened to her opinions as though they mattered, asking her advice about his sister's education and seeming genuinely interested in her thoughts about the books they had both read. Most of all, she loved the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, as though she were a puzzle he was trying to solve or a treasure he had found unexpectedly and did not quite know what to do with. Summer deepened into early fall, and the brutal heat began to ease slightly. The ranch was busy with preparations for the fall roundup, when they would gather the cattle that had ranged across the vast property all summer and sort them for various purposes. Henry was away from the house more during this time, but he still made time for his evening rides with his sisters and Marianne. One evening in late September, they rode further than usual, following the creek upstream to a place where it widened into a natural pool beneath a small waterfall. The girls immediately scrambled down from their horses and ran to the water's edge, exclaiming over the beauty of it. Henry dismounted and came to help Marianne down, his hands sure and steady at her waist. But this time, instead of releasing her immediately, he kept his hands where they were, looking down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Marianne," he said, and she loved the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" Her heart began to pound. Of course. They walked a little distance from where the girls were playing by the water, stopping beneath the spreading branches of a massive live oak. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling everything in gold and green light. "I want to ask you something," Henry began, then seemed to struggle for words, which was unusual for him. "Actually, I want to tell you something first. I have been trying to find the right time and the right words for weeks now, and I keep talking myself out of it, but I cannot keep silent any longer." "Henry, what is it?" Marianne asked, her pulse racing. "I am in love with you," he said simply, directly, his gray-green eyes steady on hers. "I think I have been since the day I caught you outside the general store, when you looked up at me with those green eyes, and I felt something shift in my chest. I know I have no right to say this. You are employed by my family, and I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. If you do not return my feelings, we will never speak of this again, and nothing will change. But I could not go another day without telling you the truth." Marianne felt tears spring to her eyes, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming emotion. "Henry, I love you too. I have been so afraid to even think it, let alone say it, but it is true. I love you." His face transformed, that rare smile breaking across it like sunrise. "Truly? Truly?" He took a step closer, and then his hands were framing her face, gentle and sure, and he was lowering his head to kiss her. His lips were warm and firm against hers, and the kiss was everything Marianne had dreamed of and more, sweet and tender and full of promise. She reached up to grip his shoulders, steadying herself against the wave of feeling that washed through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Marianne. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But I am certain. You are what I have been waiting for without knowing it. You belong here, with me, with my family. Please say you will be my wife." "Yes," Marianne said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Henry, I will marry you." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and Marianne felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally returned to where the girls were playing, hand in hand, Emma took one look at their faces and let out a squeal of delight. "You are getting married, I can tell. Oh, this is wonderful." "How can you possibly tell that?" Lily demanded, but she was grinning too. Because they are holding hands and looking at each other like people do in romantic novels, Emma said with all the authority of her 12 years. And Henry looks happier than I have seen him look in years. You are getting married, are you not? We are, Henry confirmed, pulling Marianne close against his side. If you girls approve, that is. Approve? We are thrilled! Lily launched herself at them both, wrapping her arms around their waists. Does this mean Miss Ellsworth will be our sister? It does, Marianne said, her throat tight with emotion. If that is all right with you. It is more than all right, Emma said seriously, coming to join the group embrace. We love you, Miss Ellsworth. We have been hoping Henry would realize he loved you too. He has been completely besotted for weeks. Has not, Henry protested, but he was laughing. Has too. Father even commented on it. He said he had never seen you so distracted. They rode back to the ranch in high spirits, the girls chattering excitedly about wedding plans, while Henry and Marianne exchanged glances that were full of joy and promise. When they arrived back at the house and shared the news with Maxwell Lansford, he clapped his son on the shoulder with evident satisfaction. About time, he said gruffly. I was beginning to think you were never going to work up the courage to speak to her. Miss Ellsworth, I would be honored to have you as a daughter-in-law. You have brought life back into this house and happiness back to my son. I can ask for nothing more than that. Thank you, Mr. Lansford. I promise I will make Henry happy. I have no doubt of that whatsoever. They were married 6 weeks later, in early November of 1878, at the small church in Taylor. The whole town turned out for the wedding, along with neighboring ranchers and their families, ranch hands, and anyone else who wanted to witness Henry Lansford finally taking a bride. Marianne wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that had been her mother's, altered by Mrs. Chin to fit her. Emma and Lily served as attendants, both of them glowing with excitement. As Marianne walked down the aisle on Maxwell Lansford's arm, she caught sight of Henry waiting for her at the altar, and her breath caught at the expression on his face. He looked at her as though she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune. When she reached his side and he took her hand, she felt the rightness of it settle deep in her bones. This was where she was meant to be. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but when Henry said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure, and when he kissed her, sealing their marriage, Marianne tasted salt and realized she was crying again, tears of pure joy. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard beneath the live oaks and enough food to feed an army. There was music and dancing, toasts and laughter, and through it all, Henry kept Marianne close to his side, his hand at her waist, or his fingers laced through hers, as though he could not bear to let her go even for a moment. When evening came and the guests finally began to disperse, Henry led Marianne up to the bedroom they would now share, a large room at the end of the hall that had been his parents' and was now theirs. Someone had lit candles throughout the space, and their flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls. Nervous? Henry asked softly, closing the door behind them. A little, Marianne admitted, but mostly just happy. He came to her, his hands gentle as he began to remove the pins from her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. We have all the time in the world, he said. There is no need to rush anything. But Marianne reached up and pulled his head down to hers, kissing him with all the love and desire that had been building in her for months. I am not afraid, Henry. I want this. I want you. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered endearments and gentle discoveries. Henry was patient and careful with her, making sure of her comfort, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two halves of a whole finally united. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Marianne's head on Henry's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, he murmured into her hair. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it, Marianne whispered back. You saved me, Henry. In every way a person can be saved. No, he said firmly, tilting her face up so he could look into her eyes. You saved yourself. You had the courage to come here, to start over, to take a chance on an unknown future. All I did was recognize something precious when I saw it. The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and deep happiness. Marianne continued to tutor Emma and Lily, though her role in the household shifted from employee to family member. She took on more responsibilities in managing the household, working alongside Mrs. Chin to make the house run smoothly. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to manage the household accounts, to deal with the various tradespeople and suppliers who came to the ranch. She also continued to improve her riding, and by the following spring, she could mount Daisy on her own, though Henry still often offered to lift her up simply because they both enjoyed the contact. They rode out together regularly, sometimes with the girls and sometimes alone, exploring the vast expanse of land that was now her home as well as his. The ranch prospered under Henry's management. He implemented new breeding programs that improved the quality of their cattle, and he began experimenting with different grasses to improve the pastures. Maxwell Lansford gradually turned over more of the day-to-day operations to his son, content to take a slightly less active role as he aged. In the spring of 1880, Marianne discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy to everyone in the household, but no one was happier than Henry, who became almost comically protective, insisting she not overexert herself and worrying about every little thing. I am not made of glass, Marianne protested one evening when he refused to let her carry a basket of mending downstairs. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my wife having my baby, Henry countered, taking the basket from her hands. You are precious to me, Marianne. I cannot help wanting to take care of you. You do take care of me every single day, but you have to let me continue living my life. I promise I will be careful, but I will not be an invalid for the next 6 months. They compromised, with Marianne agreeing to rest more and Henry agreeing to stop hovering quite so much. As her pregnancy progressed, Marianne found herself filled with wonder at the changes in her body, at the life growing inside her. Henry would place his hand on her swelling belly in the evenings, his face soft with amazement when he felt the baby move. Their son was born in late October of 1880, a long and difficult labor that left Marianne exhausted but triumphant. Henry stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, his face pale but determined. When Doc Harrison finally placed the squalling infant in Marianne's arms, she looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. What shall we name him? She asked Henry, who was staring at his son with an expression of pure wonder. Matthew, Henry said without hesitation. Matthew Robert, after both our fathers. Matthew Robert Lansford, Marianne repeated, trying it out. It is perfect. Emma and Lily fell instantly in love with their nephew, competing to hold him and help care for him. Maxwell Lansford was similarly besotted, declaring that the boy was the finest-looking infant he had ever seen. Mrs. Chin took over running the household entirely for the first few weeks, shooing everyone out of Marianne's room and making sure she had everything she needed to rest and recover. Henry was a devoted father from the very beginning. He would sit for hours with Matthew in his arms, talking to him in a low voice about the ranch and the horses and everything he would teach him when he was older. Watching them together, Marianne felt as though her happiness was almost too much to contain. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Grace Catherine, named for Henry's mother. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her older brother everywhere, determined not to be left out of anything. Matthew proved to be a patient and protective big brother, and the two children were rarely seen apart. Emma and Lily grew into capable young women under Marianne's guidance. Emma developed her artistic talents and eventually married a young lawyer from Austin, moving to the city but visiting frequently. Lily surprised everyone by declaring that she wanted to be a teacher, and with Marianne's encouragement, she attended a teacher's college in San Antonio before returning to Taylor to open a school for the children of ranch families who lived too far from town to attend regularly. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and family celebrations. The ranch continued to prosper, and Henry's reputation as a skilled and innovative rancher spread throughout the region. Marianne found deep satisfaction in her roles as wife, mother, and teacher, feeling as though she had finally found the place where she truly belonged. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Henry took Marianne back to the spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. They left the children with their grandfather and rode out in the late afternoon, just as they had done so many years before. The pool was exactly as Marianne remembered it, peaceful and beautiful, the water reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "Do you remember what I said to you here?" Henry asked, helping her down from her horse with the same gentle care he had always shown. "Every word," Marianne replied, leaning into his embrace. "You said you loved me, and you asked me to marry you, and you told me I belonged here with you. I meant every word then, and I mean it even more now. You have made my life complete, Marianne. You brought joy back into this house when it was sorely lacking. You gave me a family I never dreamed I could have. You are my partner in every sense of the word. And you gave me a home when I had none," Marianne said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me love when I was alone. You gave me a future when I had nothing but an uncertain present. I fell in love with you the day you lifted me gentle as a whisper, when I was too weak to even stand on my own, and you made me feel safe for the first time since my father died. Every day since then has only deepened that love." They kissed as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. And when they finally rode back to the ranch, it was to a house filled with light and laughter, where their children waited with their grandfather, where Mrs. Chen had prepared a special anniversary supper, where every room held memories of the life they had built together. Over the years that followed, they welcomed 2 more children, another son named Thomas and a daughter named Eleanor. The ranch house rang with the sounds of childhood, and Marianne often found herself marveling at how full her life had become. The lonely, frightened young woman who had arrived in Taylor with nothing but a trunk of belongings and a desperate hope for employment seemed like someone from another lifetime entirely. Matthew grew up to work alongside his father, learning the ranching business with the same natural aptitude Henry had shown. Grace surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine, studying with Doc Harrison, and eventually becoming the first female veterinarian in the county. Thomas inherited his mother's love of books and teaching, eventually joining his Aunt Lily at her school. Eleanor, the youngest, had her father's way with horses and her mother's determination, and she could outride most of the ranch hands by the time she was 15. Maxwell Lansford lived to see all his grandchildren grown, passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. His death was mourned by everyone who knew him, but there was comfort in the knowledge that he had lived a full life and died knowing his legacy was secure in his son's capable hands. As Henry and Marianne aged, their love for each other only deepened. They were the kind of couple that people pointed to as an example of what a good marriage should be, full of respect and companionship and enduring affection. They still rode out together regularly, though at a more sedate pace than in their youth, and they could often be found in the evening sitting together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they both loved. On a warm evening in the spring of 1910, when they had been married for more than 30 years, Marianne sat beside her husband on that same porch and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She was 64 years old now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Henry was 68, still strong despite the years, his hair gone completely gray, but his gray-green eyes as sharp and intelligent as ever. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked, reaching over to take her hand. "Everything," Marianne said softly. "How strange life is. How one decision can change everything. If I had not seen that advertisement in the paper, if I had not had the courage to come to Texas, if you had not been in town that particular day to catch me when I fell, then we would both have missed out on the greatest blessing of our lives," Henry finished. I do not believe in chance, Marianne. I believe we were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. Every difficulty we faced was just part of the path that led us to where we are now. Marianne squeezed his hand, looking out at the land that had become her home, at the house filled with the sounds of their grandchildren visiting for Sunday supper, at the man beside her who had been her rock and her love for more than 3 decades. I would not change a single thing. Neither would I, Henry said, lifting her hand to his lips. Not a single thing. As the sun set in a blaze of color, painting the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose, they sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would endure for generations to come. The ranch that had started as one man's dream had become a family legacy, and the love that had begun with a cowboy lifting a weak and frightened woman, gentle as a whisper, had grown into something that would outlast them both. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for years to come, of how Henry and Marianne had found each other in that dusty Texas town in 1878, of how their love had overcome every obstacle, of how they had built a life of meaning and purpose together. It became a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of kindness, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and last for all time. And when many years later, Henry and Marianne were finally laid to rest beside each other in the family plot on a hill overlooking the ranch, their descendants gathered to celebrate lives well lived and a love that had truly stood the test of time. The inscription on their shared headstone was simple but perfect. Together always, from that first gentle touch to eternity. The ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation that Henry and Marianne had built. The house they had shared remained in the family, and visitors often commented on the feeling of love that seemed to permeate every room, as though the devotion Henry and Marianne had shared had soaked into the very walls. Matthew took over the day-to-day management of the ranch when his father could no longer ride out daily, implementing modern techniques while respecting the traditional methods that had served the family so well. He married a school teacher from Taylor, and they had 4 children who filled the house with the same kind of joy that Matthew had known growing up. Grace established a veterinary practice in Taylor, treating both small animals and livestock, earning the respect of even the most skeptical old-timers who had doubted a woman could do such work. She never married, declaring that her animals were family enough for her, but she was beloved by her nieces and nephews and was always present for family gatherings. Thomas and his wife opened a private school in San Antonio, but they returned to the ranch every summer with their children, maintaining the connection to the land and family that had shaped them. Eleanor married one of the ranch hands, a steady and capable man who loved the land as much as she did, and they built a house on the far side of the property, raising horses and their own family of 5 children. The legacy that Henry and Marianne had built together extended far beyond the physical boundaries of the ranch. Emma's children became lawyers and teachers and business people, spreading throughout Texas and beyond, but always remembering their roots. Lily's school educated hundreds of children over the years, many of whom went on to lives they never could have imagined without the education she provided. But more than the material success or the professional accomplishments, what Henry and Marianne left behind was the example of their love. In a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, especially on the Texas frontier, they had created a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering support. They had shown their children and grandchildren what it meant to work together toward common goals, to weather difficulties with grace, to celebrate joys with gratitude. Their story became a touchstone for the family, invoked whenever young people were struggling with their own relationships or facing difficult decisions. Remember Henry and Marianne, the elders would say. Remember how they met, how they built something beautiful from nothing, how they loved each other through everything life threw at them. That is the example you should follow. And so, the love story that had begun with a desperate young woman collapsing outside a general store too weak to mount her own horse, rescued by a cowboy who lifted her gentle as a whisper, became more than just a personal history. It became a family legend, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that kindness and compassion can lead to the greatest blessings, and that a life built on true partnership and devotion is the greatest success anyone can achieve. The ranch house still stands on that Texas hillside, now over a century old, filled with the descendants of Henry and Marianne Lansford. And on warm spring evenings, when the sun sets in a blaze of color over the rolling hills, if you stand by the creek where the pool reflects the golden light, you can almost feel the presence of those two souls who loved this land and each other so deeply, their story woven forever into the fabric of the place they called home.